Hello, welcome, dear students, to this class on art and literary aesthetics. In today's session, we'll be taking a brief look at the overview of art history. We'll be looking at various movements across art, right from the beginning, right from the prehistoric era to the present. The origins of art history can be traced back to the prehistoric era before written records were kept. The earliest artifacts come from the Paleolithic era or the Old Stone Age in the form of rock carvings, engravings, pictorial imagery, sculptures, and stone arrangements. Art from this period relied basically on the use of natural pigments and stone carvings to create representations of objects, animals, and rituals that governed a particular civilization. This is a famous picture that dates back almost 20,000 years. After the prehistoric era, we have ancient art civilizations belonging to Mesopotamia, Egypt, and Greece, especially. So, ancient art ranging from 4000 BC to AD 400. It was produced by these advanced civilizations, especially Mesopotamia, Egypt, and Greece. The medium of a work of art from this period varies depending on the civilization that produced it. No, but the basic purpose was to tell stories, to decorate utilitarian objects like bowls, weapons, to display religious and symbolic imagery, and to demonstrate social status. This is a picture from the Mesopotamian civilization. Animal forms, particularly horses and lions, were represented in great detail. This is one such example from that period. This is a place which is called known as modern day Iraq. And when we come to Egypt, again during at that point of time, we have Egyptian art, which is expressed through painting, sculpture, and especially jewelry. And much of the artwork from that period comes from the tombs and the monuments. You know about our pyramids, right? And the next famous civilization of that period belongs to Greece. Sculpture and architecture from Greek civilization have influenced others throughout history. And human forms took on realistic proportions, and minute details were also painted during this period. In Rome, uh, the style art was greatly influenced by Greek culture. Mythological subject matter predominated art at this time. And after this, we have the medieval period, medieval art. The Middle Ages, often referred to as the Dark Ages, marked a period of economic and cultural deterioration following the fall of the Roman Empire in 476 AD. Much of the artwork produced during these years reflects the darkness characterized by grotesque imagery and brutal scenery. Art produced during this time was centered around the church. It was at this time that Christianity was being spread throughout Europe, and so the art and architecture follows a religious tradition. The spirit was also responsible for the emergence of illuminated manuscripts and also Gothic architecture. Gothic style in architecture, and later on, this medieval style influenced novelists and poets of England and America, to be specific. And definitive examples of influential art from this period include the catacombs in Rome, Hagia Sophia in Istanbul, and so on. During this medieval period, Art was largely produced with a variety of medium, including illuminated manuscripts, paintings, sculptures, stained glass, metalworks, mosaics, and even textiles. One example is Byzantine art, another medieval, another kind of art which was popular at that point of time. With the spread of Christianity throughout Europe, art and architecture during Byzantine era followed a religious theme. Paintings, mosaics, and sculpture were common forms of artistic expression. Now, another important thing is that illuminated Bible manuscripts were also found. Then Romanesque, popular during 500 to 980. Following the tradition at this time, Romanesque period is marked by lavishly decorated architecture, manuscripts, and embroidery. And Gothic, developed in France out of the Romanesque period. This art, Gothic art, began with the construction of monumental architecture. So you might have seen in certain films where you have enormous pillars, the huge mansions, castles, where you have terrifying dungeons, damp dungeons, huge pillars. So that kind of architecture is called Gothic architecture. Very ornately designed cathedrals with luminous stained glass windows were commonly constructed at that point of time. And that was followed by Renaissance art in 1400 to 1600. That was the time for Renaissance art. This style of painting, sculpture, and decorative art was characterized by a focus on nature and individualism. The thought of man as independent and self reliant was given importance. Though these ideals were present in the late medieval period, they flourished in the 15th and 16th centuries, paralleling social and economic changes like secularization. The Renaissance reached its height in Florence, Italy, due in large part to the Medici, a wealthy merchant family who adamantly supported the arts and humanism, a variety of beliefs and philosophies that places emphasis on the human realm. The High Renaissance, which lasted from 1490 to 1527, produced influential artists such as Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Raphael, each of whom brought creative power and spearheaded ideals of emotional expression. Artwork throughout the Renaissance was characterized by realism, attention to detail, and a precise study of human anatomy. Artists used a linear perspective and created depth through intense lighting and shading. Art began to change stylistically shortly after the High Renaissance when clashes between Christian faith and humanism gave way to Mannerism. Another movement that followed that followed our Renaissance. So these are the few paintings of that era, of the Renaissance era. We have the famous painting Mona Lisa by Leonardo da Vinci, paintings by Michelangelo, Raphael. So some of these are a few examples from that period. Common forms of artistic expression during the Renaissance include painting, fresco, and sculpture. And centered around the church, art was commonly themed around religion, mythology, and portraits. And following this Renaissance, we have another uh, movement in art, that is the period of Baroque period that followed a mannerism, which yielded that full mannerism yielded ornate, over the top visual arts and architecture. It was characterized by grandeur and richness, punctuated by an interest in broadening human intellect and global discovery. Baroque artists were stylistically complex. Their Baroque paintings were characterized by drama seen in the iconic works of the Italian painter Caravaggio and Dutch painter Rembrandt. Painters used an intense contrast between light and dark and had energetic compositions matched by rich color palette. Dramatic biblical depictions are common in frescoes and paintings. During the Baroque period, artists commissioned to paint portraits were interested in depicting the wealth and social status of the patrons. They also used symbolism and focus on detailed rendering of clothing in order to help us to understand the importance of the figures being depicted. So this is also another movement that followed Renaissance. Following the tradition developed by Renaissance and Baroque artists, these mannerisms, it's a period in which artists created images of elongated and slightly disproportionate figures. That is one feature of this movement. When you look at this painting, you will understand how the elongated structure of a woman of this and another movement that originated in Paris is Rococo. During this time, it encompassed decorative art, painting, architecture, and sculpture. The aesthetic offered a soft style of decorative art compared to Baroque's exuberance. Rococo is characterized by lightness and elegance, focusing on the use of natural forms, asymmetrical design, and subtle colors. Painters like Antoni Watteau and Franco Boscio used light-hearted treatments, rich brushwork, and fresh colors. These are a few examples of paintings from this period. From the beautiful frescoes to lavish furniture, Rococo was a period of royal luxury. And that was followed by Neoclassicism in art and literature. A reformation of art and architecture, neoclassical art sought to bring back the classical elements of ancient Greeks and Romans. The neoclassical period drew upon elements from classical antiquity. They tried to imitate the classical Greek and Roman masters. Archaeological ruins of ancient civilizations in Athens and Naples that were discovered at this time reignited a passion for all things belonging to the past, and the artists strove to recreate the great works of ancient artists. This translated to a renewed interest in the classical ideals of harmony, simplicity, and proportion. They were influenced by the classical elements, in particular, a focus on idealism. Inevitably, they also included modern, historically relevant depictions in their works as well. Romanticism, the movement that followed Neoclassicism, embodies a broad range of disciplines from painting to music to literature. The ideals present in each of these art forms reject order, harmony, and rationality, key concepts in the neoclassical period, which were embraced in both classical art and neoclassicism, these features. Instead, Romantic artists emphasized the individual and imagination. Another defining Romantic ideal was an appreciation for nature, with many turning to painting, which brought artists out of dark interiors and enabled them to paint outside. Artists also focused on passion, emotion, and sensation over intellect and reason. Not only artists, poets as well. Prominent Romantic painters include Henri Fuseli, who created strange, macabre paintings that explored the dark recesses of human psychology, and William Blake, whose mysterious poems and images conveyed mystical visions and his disappointment in societal constraints. Realism, arguably the first modern art movement, began in France in the 1840s. Realism was a result of multiple events, the anti-romantic movement in Germany, the rise of journalism, and the advent of photography. Each inspired new interest in accurately capturing everyday life. This attention to accuracy is evident in art produced during this movement, which featured detailed, lifelike depictions of subject matter. One of the most influential leaders of realist movement is Gustave Courbet, a French artist committed to painting only what he could physically see. A focus on real life scenes characterizes the realist style. And this is followed by Impressionism. Impressionist painters sought to capture the immediate impression of a particular moment. It's not the realistic portrayal of a painting, but an impression of the artist. This was characterized by short, quick brush strokes and unfinished sketch like feel. Impressionist artists used modern life as their subject matter, painting situations like dance halls, a sailboat, and so on. And they also, rather than historical and mythological events, they tried to incorporate contemporary life. Claude Monet, a French artist who spearheaded the idea of expressing one's perceptions before nature, is virtually synonymous with the Impressionist movement. This is one painting by Claude Monet. His notable works include the Water Lily Pond, which came out in 1899, Woman with a Parasol, Impression Sunrise, from which the name of the movement itself is derived. Impressionism. With the advent of these movements, the era of isms uh, was inaugurated. So these are also other examples of impressionist paintings. Post-Impressionist painters worked independently rather than as a group, but each influential post-Impressionist painter had similar ideals. They concentrated on subjective visions and symbolic personal meanings rather than observations of the outside world. This was often achieved through abstract forms. Painters like George Seurat, noted for his pointillism technique that used small, distinct dots to form an image. Pointillism is another technique, another term that you need to familiarize when you look at this movement, post-impressionism. Now, the very important painter of this time is Vincent van Gogh, who is considered as a post-impressionist painter, searching for personal expression through his art, often through rugged brush strokes and dark tones. He continued to develop images with vivid colors, dynamic brushwork, and real life subject matter. So, these are a few examples belonging to this period. Then we have a number of movements coming up. The era of isms, modern art movements. We have Expressionism, Fauvism, Cubism, Futurism, Dadaism, Surrealism. There are an empty number of movements coming after this. Collectively, many of these movements are called avant-garde movements. So, from the exam point of view, sometimes you will be asked to write on avant-garde movement in art and literature. So, you need to write about these movements, these modern art movements. The very important one is German Expressionism. Expressionism emerged as a response to increasingly conflicted worldviews and the loss of spirituality. Expressionist art sought to draw from within the artist, using a distortion of form and strong colors to display anxieties and raw emotions. Expressionist painters, in a quest for authenticity, looked for inspiration beyond that of Western art and frequented ethnographic museums to revisit native folk traditions and also tribal art. The roots of Expressionism can be traced to Vincent van Gogh, Edvard Munch, and James Ensor. Prominent groups including Die Brock or The Bridge and the Blue Rider formed so artists could publish works and express their ideals collectively. Then Another important movement, that is Fauvism, led by Henry Matisse. It is built upon examples from Vincent van Gogh. As the first avant-garde movement, this is considered to be the first avant-garde movement of the 20th century. The style was characterized by expressive use of intense color, line and brushwork, a bold sense of surface design, and flat composition. As seen in many of the works of Matisse himself, the separation of color from its descriptive representational purpose was one of the core elements that shaped this movement. Fauvism was an important precursor of Cubism and Expressionism that we have looked into. This is a painting by Matisse. Cubism was established by Pablo Picasso and Georges Braque, who rejected the concept that art should copy nature. They moved away from the traditional techniques and perspectives. Instead, they created radically fragmented objects through abstraction. Many Cubist painters' works are marked by flat two-dimensional surfaces, geometric forms or cubes of objects, and multiple vantage points. Their subjects weren't even discernible. Very important point that you have to notice. They didn't give importance to this perspective. They didn't give importance to that. For them, the images were fragmented into geometric shape. It is characterized by broken, reassembled, and abstracted forms. It transformed art into a unique modern style. Futurism is uh, this movement in art which originated in Italy. This style of art sought to transform how we see old forms in new ways. The futurists explored every medium of art, including interior design and theater. Followed by this futurism, we have another movement, that is Dadaism, which had its cultural root in Switzerland. Dada was a response to the seriousness of war. Rejecting traditional standards of art, Dada artists found art and humor in the meaningless objects of everyday life. Dada art is characterized as anti-war and anti-art. It was a foundation for future art movements such as Surrealism and pop art. This is very important of painting by Marcel Duchamp, where he recreated or re-represented the image of Mona Lisa with a mustache. Surrealism is another very important movement that emerged from the Dada art movement in the 1960s, showcasing works of art that defied reason. Surrealists denounced the rationalist mindset. They blamed this thought process on events like First World War, and believed it to repress imaginative thoughts. Surrealists were influenced by Karl Marx and the theories developed by Freud as well, who explored psychoanalysis and the power of imagination. Influential surrealist artists like Salvador Dali tapped into the unconscious mind to depict revelations found on the street and in everyday life. Dali's paintings, in particular, pair vivid and bizarre dreams with historical accuracy. These are a few examples of paintings of surrealist painting. One is this persistence of time. These artists like Salvador Dali experimented with reality and psychological elements. Abstract Expressionism, which are shaped by the legacy of Surrealism. This abstract Expressionism emerged in New York after the Second World War. It is often referred to as the New York School or action painting. These painters and abstract sculptors broke away from what was considered conventional and instead used spontaneity and improvisation to create abstract works of art. This included colossally scaled works whose size could no longer be accommodated by an easel. Instead, canvases would be placed directly upon the floor. Celebrated abstract expressionist painters include Jackson Pollock, known for his unique style of drip painting, and Mark Rothko, whose paintings employed large blocks of color to convey a sense of spirituality. So, these are examples of expressionist painting and action painting of that time. Gestural abstraction, that's another term for this, the terminology. This unique style of painting explores the application and expression of medium. Color field painting, that originated in New York City. This abstract form of painting is known by its application of flat fields of color. A focus on a refined and consistent application of paint is characteristic of this time. Then pop art is one of the most recognizable artistic movements of the 20th century. The movement transitioned away from the methods used in abstract expressionism and instead used everyday mundane objects to create innovative works of art that challenged consumerism and mass media. This introduction to identifiable imagery was a shift from the direction of modernism. Pop artists like Andy Warhol and Roy Lichtenstein sought to establish the idea that art can draw from any source and there is no hierarchy of culture to disrupt that. Perhaps the most famous pop culture work of art is Warhol's Campbell's Soup Can's Production. Minimalism, another another movement that gave emphasis that actually emerged in New York as a group of younger artists when they began to question the overly expressive works of abstract expressionist artists. Minimalist art instead focused on anonymity, calling attention to the materiality of works. Artists urged viewers to focus on precisely what was in front of them rather than draw parallels to outside realities and emotive thoughts through the use of purified forms, order, simplicity, and harmony. American artists like artist Frank Stella was of the earliest adopters of minimalism, producing non-representational paintings as seen in his painting, black paintings completed between 1958 and 1960. Each features a pattern of rectilinear stripes of uniform width printed in metallic black ink. This is the painting. So, optical illusion art or op art, the art of optical illusion. Heightened by advances in science and technology as well as an interest in optical effects and illusions, this op art or short form for optical art movement launched with Le Movement, a group exhibition at Galerie Denis Rene in 1955. Artists active in this style used shapes, colors, and patterns to create images that appeared to be moving or blurring, often produced in black and white for maximum contrast. These abstract patterns were meant to both confuse and excite the eyes. English artist Bridget Riley is one of the most prominent optical art practitioners. Her work Blaze features zigzag black and white lines that create the illusion of a circular descent. This is another painting of this movement by Vasarely. From 1970 to the present, we have the postmodern art or the contemporary art from the 1970s onwards. The 1970s marked the beginning of the contemporary art, which extends through present day. This period is dominated by various schools and smaller movements emerged. Postmodernism, feminism in art, neo-expressionism, street art, the pictures generation, appropriation art, young British artists, digital art. These are a few examples that came, moments that came out during this period. These are a few examples that few examples of contemporary art forms. Some try to explore for form and function, but many artists looked at the environment for inspiration, while others continued to look from within. Art, as we know it, will continue to change as artists seek to invent new ways to create fascinating images to capture a worldwide audience. So, this is a brief history of art forms. So, from the exam point of view, please look at certain movements and try to study the key features of those movements. For example, Cubism, Surrealism, post-expression, Impressionism, Realism, Romanticism. So please try to take a look at those movements and try to write short notes after listening to this.